There is a hidden truth we rarely speak aloud. What is always available is rarely valued. In the age of constant connection, we are told that accessibility is a virtue. Be reachable, be online, be responsive, be there for everyone. But what if I told you that your constant availability is the very thing diluting your power, fragmenting your soul, and stealing your time from the one person who needs you most, yourself? Let me take you on a journey inward. We walk through our lives as if time were a ledger to be balanced, a commodity to be bought, sold, or traded. But this illusion is the first betrayal. Time is not something we possess. It is something we are. Each tick of the clock is not simply a second past. It is a breath drawn from the eternal well of your being. Your time is the outward expression of your inner life, and yet we scatter it like coins into the hands of those who neither understand its value nor care for its cost. Consider how often you've surrendered an hour to a conversation you did not wish to have, to an expectation you did not agree to a task that left your soul emptier than before. These moments are not small. They are sacred particles of your existence, and once given, they do not return. But we are taught to ignore this. We are trained to see time as a measure of productivity, a means to prove our worth, to justify our presence, and so we chase validation, praise, status, believing these trophies will somehow refill the well we are depleting drop by drop. But there is a voice beneath the noise, a whisper beneath the social contract. It is the voice that trembles when we agree to something we do not want, the silence that screams when we are surrounded yet utterly alone. That voice is the self, the core, the true witness of your life. It knows the cost of each false yes and the power of every hard-earned no. It begs to be heard, not through words, but through the honoring of your time as sacred, an altar upon which only worthy offerings should be placed. A man once came to me in quiet desperation. "Everyone has access to me," he said, "but not me." His voice cracked like dry earth. I looked at him and asked, "If your phone's battery were your soul, how long could you last before shutting down?" He broke, because he knew. He had been living on empty, scraping from the bottom of a well that had not been filled in years. He was not lazy, nor broken. He was simply depleted by a world that praises the busy and punishes the still. To honor your time is not selfish. It is an act of reverence. It is to say, my existence is not up for negotiation. It is to reclaim your life from the machinery of guilt, performance, and silent suffering. Until you choose to see your time as sacred, others will treat it as expendable. You are the guardian of your hours. You are the steward of your days. Do not wait for permission to protect what was never meant to be offered so freely. The life you yearn to live is already here. It begins the moment you stop giving yourself away. When we confuse availability with love, we entangle ourselves in a subtle betrayal of our innermost being. We begin to imagine that to love means to be endlessly present, perpetually reachable, constantly giving. And yet, beneath this eager response lies not the fire of compassion, but the shadow of fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear that without usefulness we will be invisible. We offer ourselves not as whole beings, but as fragments, pieces sliced from our essence in desperate barter for belonging. This is not love. This is self-abandonment masquerading as care. Love does not ask us to be everywhere at once. It does not demand we dissolve ourselves in the needs of others. What it asks, quietly but insistently, is for the truth. It asks for the presence of the soul, not the performance of a role. The individual who is always available, who never declines, never sets a boundary, has not mastered love. They have forsaken themselves. To be constantly available is to fracture the self, to pull away from the sacred center of one's own existence. It is to feed the hunger of others while starving your own. And when the soul is starved, it becomes silent. It no longer whispers its guidance, no longer sings in moments of stillness. The noise of everyone else drowns it out. And yet, the world praises the martyr. It exalts the ever-giving, ever-smiling, ever-there. But behind the applause lies a deep emptiness, for no one can carry the weight of another's becoming. When you say yes to every request, when you silence your fatigue, your resentment, your sorrow, you do not offer love, you offer your absence, for you have left yourself behind. True presence is not a matter of constant contact. It is the quality of the soul that shows up in wholeness. It is the unshakable clarity that says, I see you, and I also see myself. It is the rootedness that allows us to stand firm, even when we choose not to answer the call, even when we say no. That no, uttered in truth, is a deeper form of care than 1,000 anxious yeses. We must unlearn the belief that our value lies in our accessibility. We must remember that our worth is not measured by how often we appear, but by how deeply we arrive. When we cease to perform love and begin to embody it, we return to ourselves, not as tools, not as saviors, but as whole, sovereign beings. In doing so, we grant others the same invitation to rise into their own wholeness, not on our backs, but beside us. And that is love. In the silent chambers of the soul, there lies a profound truth often overlooked. Boundaries are not acts of separation, but invitations to sacred communion. To set a boundary is not to exile others, but to honor the sanctity of your inner world. It is an affirmation not of superiority, but of self-respect. Yet so many tremble at the thought, haunted by the specter of rejection, gripped by the illusion that love must be limitless in its accessibility to be real. But love without form becomes a flood. It loses its shape, drowns rather than nourishes. There is a terrible beauty in learning that the self is not meant to be endlessly penetrable. A garden flourishes not in the wild, but behind the care of a gate, tended with devotion. Without the quiet declaration of, "This is mine," the flowers are crushed, the soil depleted, the sacred space forgotten. One must learn to become the gatekeeper of their own soul, not in hostility, but in reverence. For what you allow, you grow. What you permit, you become. Imagine yourself as a home, built from memory, desire, wound, and hope. Would you leave the door open to the winds and storms of the world, to be ravaged without discretion? No. The door exists not to block love, but to protect its hearth. A door opens by choice, not compulsion, and therein lies the essence of a boundary. The right to choose who is given access to your sacred fire. It is not coldness, it is the warmth of clarity. The world may call it selfishness. Let them, for the tree that refuses to bend to every wind is not cruel, it is rooted. The river that carves its path without apology is not arrogant, it is inevitable. So too must we learn to walk in our truth with quiet certainty, knowing that availability to all is not the measure of love, but of fear. Fear of being unloved, of being seen as less than kind, of being left alone. But in that fear we lose ourselves. We dissolve into the needs and demands of others, until we forget the shape of our own soul. Consider the lion. It does not roar for attention, nor prostrate itself for approval. It moves through the grass with certainty, because it knows what it is. The lion is not unkind, it is simply sovereign. And in that sovereignty, it commands respect. It draws the gaze of the worthy, not because it begs to be seen, but because it dares to be true. When you stop being endlessly accessible, when you place your energy within a chosen circle, you do not shrink your love, you deepen its value. You become a magnet for those who are ready to meet you in authenticity, not convenience. This is not the path of isolation, it is the path of integration. A life shaped not by fear of losing others, but by the courage to find yourself. And in that rediscovery, in that powerful stillness of knowing who you are, the doors you choose to open will lead to relationships not of need, but of mutual reverence. There is a hidden truth that festers in the shadow of our most well-meaning intentions, the belief that our constant availability is a measure of our worth. We live in an age that glorifies self-sacrifice, that mistakes endless accessibility for love, for loyalty, for strength. And yet, this performance of presence slowly hollows us out. We smile, we nod, we answer the calls, we extend our hands until they tremble, until the very soul within begins to whisper, then shout, that something is wrong. Resentment is not born from cruelty, but from the quiet erosion of boundaries. It is the psyche's protest against the betrayal of the self. Imagine the cup, simple, unadorned, full. We take a sip, offer it to another, and another, until eventually there is nothing left. Still, hands reach for more, and in our desperation to be good, to be kind, we tip the cup upside down, pretending that emptiness is abundance. But the soul knows. The soul aches. It does not forget the wound of giving too much. There comes a moment when exhaustion transforms into bitterness, when love becomes obligation, when compassion feels like a burden. This is the moment we begin to resent, not just the world, but ourselves, for letting it happen. A woman once confided in me, her voice soft with regret and awakening. "I used to answer every 2 a.m. phone call from my toxic ex," she said. "I thought I was helping him." But what she was really doing was deserting herself, night after night, allowing his chaos to invade the sacred hours of her rest, her peace. What she called help was in truth a slow bleeding of her spirit. We often dress our suffering in the costume of virtue, believing that to deny our own needs is noble, but it is not noble to abandon oneself. It is abandonment, plain and simple. The self, neglected long enough, does not disappear, it revolts. This form of emotional martyrdom is insidious. We call it kindness when we cannot say no. We call it strength when we endure beyond reason. But these are masks, not virtues. To be endlessly available is to turn one's heart into a waiting room, always open, always lit, while our own soul shivers in the dark. Emotional self-harm wears many faces, and often it looks like being there for everyone but yourself. And the tragedy is that no one applauds the burnout. No one thanks the one who has given past the point of breaking. They just ask for more. To reclaim our vitality, we must learn the sacred art of refusal. Not from cruelty, but from reverence. For our time, our energy, our inner life. Let no one convince you that your worth is measured in how often you abandon your own needs. Resentment, after all, is the soul's final defense, its last cry for sanctuary. And if we listen, really listen, we may yet find our way back to wholeness. Imagine a song composed without a single rest, a melody that rushes forward with no reprieve. The notes, though beautiful in isolation, blend into a suffocating wall of sound. It becomes noise, not music. Now, envision a painting in which every inch of canvas is saturated with pigment, no white left, no emptiness, no breath. The eye scans but finds no place to land. Overwhelmed, it turns away. Or consider a speech, relentless and breathless, words tumbling one over another without pause or emphasis. What begins as communication ends in dissonance, a flood where meaning drowns. The absence of space annihilates the possibility of depth. This is the quiet power of emptiness. the sacred function of space. It is not merely the lack of something, it is the presence of potential, the silent container that allows the essence to emerge, to expand, and to resonate. In our lives, just as in art and music, space is what gives meaning to structure, what allows light to illuminate the dark and the self to be seen. Without space, there is no reflection. Without reflection, there is no becoming. In relationships, space is often misunderstood as distance or detachment, but space, when cultivated with intention, is the most generous form of love. To step back is not to abandon, but to allow. To breathe is not to retreat, but to re-enter more fully. When we give space to another, we are saying, "I trust your becoming." We are relinquishing the need to shape, to control, to possess, and in doing so, we make room for the soul of the other to unfold. That unfolding is where true intimacy lives, not in constant contact, but in the mystery of presence that chooses to return. Not in the ceaseless chatter, but in the echo of silence, where the real voice finally speaks. The same is true in our work. Productivity is worshipped in our age. Motion mistaken for progress, fullness for richness. But motion without intention becomes frenzy. Fullness without pause becomes burnout. We must reclaim the sacred art of stopping. For it is in stillness that clarity arises. In rest, the subconscious reshuffles its truths. Insight needs space to bloom. When we step back, whether from a problem, a project, or a path, we invite a deeper wisdom to the surface. We allow what we do not yet know to find its way to us. Even the most exquisite craftsmanship, be it in architecture, music, or design, relies on the balance between what is present and what is absent. The Japanese concept of ma, the interval or emptiness that holds meaning, teaches us that the space between things is as vital as the things themselves. It is not the pillars alone that make the temples sacred, but the space they enclose. It is not the words alone that make the poem beautiful, but the silences they imply. And so it is in life. We must learn not to fill every moment, not to answer every question, not to say yes to every call. To live fully is not to do everything, it is to do a few things with great depth. To leave space between the notes of our days so that what matters can be heard. The great paradox is this: it is not the abundance of action that brings significance, but the rarity of presence. Think of luxury. The finest things are not found everywhere, not handed out without discretion. Their value is born of their scarcity. We crave what is rare not simply because it is inaccessible, but because it reminds us of worth. Your presence too becomes more magnetic when it is not diluted by constant availability. To be everywhere is to be nowhere. To be always accessible is to become invisible. But when you create space, by saying no, by choosing when to engage, you generate gravity. Others begin to lean in, drawn by the mystery of your centeredness. And so the teacher withdraws before he speaks. The healer retreats into solitude before returning to the sick. The leader pauses before offering vision. This is not weakness. It is strength forged in silence. It is not absence. It is preparation. When we step into silence, we meet the archetypes that shape our hidden landscapes. We encounter not only our desires, but our shadows. Not only our light, but the vast terrain of what we have yet to understand. And in that confrontation, a deeper self emerges, one not enslaved by expectation, but anchored in essence. To fear space is to fear the unknown, and yet the unknown is where all growth originates. A seed must fall into darkness to germinate. A caterpillar dissolves into a formless soup before it takes wing. The psyche too needs moments of unknowing, times when the old identity disintegrates and something new waits to be born. But we must create the space for that alchemy to happen. We must resist the urge to fill the silence with answers, to fill the void with noise. Instead, we must sit in it, breathe in it, trust in it. This is not easy. In a world that demands constant performance, creating space can feel like rebellion. It may be seen as laziness, selfishness, or even failure, but it is the most courageous act of all. It is the reclaiming of one's inner rhythm from the drumbeat of urgency. It is the radical declaration, I will not be defined by endless doing, but by meaningful being. So we step back. We allow the breath to return. We let the canvas have its white, the song its rest, the life its pause. And in doing so, we do not disappear. We emerge, not as echoes of others' demands, but as clear voices forged in the quiet, not as frantic shadows, but as beings rooted in the soil of purpose. The world does not need more noise. It needs resonance. And resonance is born in space. Make room for it. When the soul is perpetually occupied by the endless noise of the world, it forgets its own sound. And yet, in that sound lies the secret melody of your destiny. We are taught from an early age that to be useful is to be present for others, to be good is to be available, and to be kind is to be constantly responsive. But rarely are we taught that there is a sacred responsibility to be available to ourselves, not in a narcissistic withdrawal, not in a selfish retreat from duty, but in the honest, urgent work of becoming. You must ask yourself, how often do you truly meet yourself? Not the roles you play, the obligations you fulfill, or the masks you wear, but the raw, unfiltered truth of your being. There is an untended garden in the heart of each person, waiting not for praise, not for attention, but for presence. And that presence, that pure availability to the self, is what determines whether the garden will bloom or rot in silence. It is a bitter paradox that the more we give our time to the world, the less time we seem to have to face the one question that matters. Who am I becoming? The ceaseless flood of distractions, the instant gratification of validation, the compulsion to please, to be seen, to be heard. These are the new chains, polished and disguised as virtues. But behind the sheen lies a deep forgetfulness, a forgetfulness of soul, of purpose, of destiny. And so we lose ourselves, not through catastrophe, but through compromise. 1,000 small yeses to what drains us, and silence when our inner voice calls out in the night. The soul does not shout, it whispers. And those whispers grow fainter the more we abandon ourselves to outer demands. We become ghosts in our own lives, showing up to everything but never fully present in anything. There is a sacred power in solitude. It is there in the stillness that the great work begins. Not the work of producing or performing, but the work of integrating the fragmented pieces of self. The silence is not empty, it is pregnant with truth. Every moment you dare to be alone with yourself, not just physically but psychically, you are crossing the threshold into the inner sanctum of transformation. And this is where destiny begins to take shape. Not from external acclaim, but from inner alignment. Many are afraid to be alone, not because they dislike solitude, but because in solitude the masks fall, the illusions dissolve, the shadows come forward, and in that vulnerable place the truth emerges, the truth of wounds unhealed, desires unmet, and potentials unfulfilled. But this confrontation is not a punishment, it is an invitation to stop hiding from the pain that shapes you, from the chaos that teaches you, and from the dreams that have not died, but only been buried beneath the rubble of noise. The world rewards urgency, speed, and noise, but your soul moves differently. It moves slowly, rhythmically, like the deep current of a river underground. And to hear it, to truly hear it, you must be still. You must say no to the world long enough to say yes to yourself. And that no is not rejection, it is protection. It is the necessary boundary that allows for the emergence of something holy within, the self that you were always meant to become. Too often we fear that saying no will make us miss out on life. But the true tragedy is that by saying yes to everything, we miss out on ourselves. We become efficient machines, perfectly adjusted to a sick society, but deeply disconnected from our own inner axis. And so we spin, outwardly successful, inwardly hollow. We achieve without fulfillment. We perform without meaning. We live without essence. But there is another way, a radical return, a sacred rebellion. It begins with reclaiming your own attention. Not the scattered fragments of focus you give to devices or distractions, but your full, undivided presence. You must become fiercely loyal to your own becoming. You must become available not to the expectations of others, but to the longing of your soul. This longing is not random. It is the map of your becoming. It pulls you toward experiences, people, books, dreams, and even breakdowns, not because life is cruel, but because your soul wants you whole. And wholeness cannot be downloaded, scheduled, or fast-tracked. It must be cultivated through presence, reflection, and honest confrontation with the self. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat with your own longing? Not to analyze it, not to fix it, but simply to be with it, in the same way you would sit with a friend in grief or a child in wonder. That kind of attention, that sacred availability to yourself, is the birthplace of transformation. It is where clarity emerges, where patterns break, and where courage is born. Not the courage to fight the world, but the courage to become fully yourself. You were not born to fulfill others' expectations. You were born to bring something into the world that only you can bring. And that gift can only be discovered in the quiet soil of inner listening. Every time you make yourself available to the whispers within, the dreams, the fears, the callings, you step more fully into your destiny. It is not grand gestures that shape a life, but these quiet choices, these sacred refusals, these moments of fierce, tender loyalty to the truth unfolding within. And yes, it will cost you. You will be misunderstood. You will be called selfish. You will be judged for withdrawing from the performance. But what is the alternative? A life of noise? A life spent living everyone else's story but your own? You must decide what is worth more, external applause or inner peace. You cannot have both. The path is not easy. It is narrow, steep, and often lonely. But it leads somewhere the crowd cannot go. It leads to the center of your own soul, to the fire that never went out, to the voice that never stopped speaking, to the life you were always meant to live. Not for others, not for approval, but for the sheer sacred joy of being fully alive in your own skin. And so you must ask yourself daily, am I available to my own becoming, or have I sold my presence to the world? The answer to that question does not just shape your schedule, it shapes your soul. It determines your destiny. For it is only in the temple of your own inner presence that the great mystery unfolds. The mystery of who you are, why you are here, and what only you can bring to the world. Be available to that. Say yes to that. And you will never again question the path. For you will know that you are becoming exactly who you were created to be. So I ask you now, who are you when the notifications stop, when the door is closed, when no one is asking anything of you? That is the version of you that holds the answers, the healing, the power. It is time to stop being constantly available to the world and start being faithfully available to your soul. Because your presence is not a product, it is a gift. Honor it, and in doing so you will find that the right people, the right opportunities, and the right life no longer require your availability, they require your authenticity. Thank you.